social media. It's a big part of the lives of young people today. Big as in 5 hours a day or more.
It isn't a hobby. It's our friends, our social lives, our schoolwork, our news, it's our media.
Which is to say, it isn't going away. Not at all.
But the companies that run the platforms are now under fire. As Congress, the courts, and parents all want to know how they got to be so powerful, so addictive, and so profitable so quickly.
Frances Haugen was working at Facebook when she had the chance to see what no one outside the company could. That Facebook had data, damning data, that its platforms, Facebook and Instagram, were doing real harm.
Frances decided to blow the whistle, and did so first in the Wall Street Journal and then in front of Congress.
My name is Frances Haugen. I used to work at Facebook. I'm here today because I believe Facebook's products harm children, stoke division, and weaken our democracy.
I'm Aiden Cohn-Murphy, the founder of Gen Z for Change.
And I'm Olivia Seltzer, the founder of The Cram.
And we're here today with 15 young adults in an open roundtable to explore social media and its impact on our community in a conversation with Frances Haugen, who's known as the Facebook whistleblower. Welcome, Frances. Well, thank you so much to everyone for joining us for our tech roundtable with Frances Haugen. I am so glad to see all of you here. My name is Aiden Cohn-Murphy. I use he, him, his pronouns. I am the founder of Gen Z for Change, and I'm a freshman at Harvard.
Yeah, thank you all so much. I'm the other moderator. My name is Olivia Seltzer. I'm the founder of The Cram, which is a news outlet for Gen Z, and I'm also a freshman at Harvard.
So it would be great if we can all go around and everyone can share maybe their name, their grade, where they're from, and maybe one social media platform that they spend a lot of time on.
Hi, everyone. My name is Connor. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a first year at Vassar, and then I use Instagram the most in terms of social media.
I'm Sasha. I'm a junior in high school, and I use Discord a lot.
I'm Kyle. I'm a sophomore in high school, and I probably use Snapchat the most.
Hi, I'm Isabel. I have COVID, so that's why my voice sounds weird, but I'm a freshman at the University of Virginia, and I use TikTok the most.
Hi, my name is William. I'm a senior in high school at Lake Oswego. It's in Portland. I use he, him pronouns, and I spend the most time on Instagram.
I'm Luna. I'm in the CUNY system. I'm a freshman, and I use Instagram and TikTok quite a lot.
Hi, I'm Avalon. I am a junior at Barnard College, Columbia University. I'm also on the board here at the SustainableMedia.Center, and I use Instagram the most.
Hello, my name is Eliana. I am an art director for iGeneration Youth, and I use Instagram the most.
My name is Cassie. I'm Eliana's coworker. I'm also an art director at iGeneration Youth.
Hello, I'm Tia. I go by she, her, and I'm in 10th grade. I'm homeschooled. The platform I use the most, I would say YouTube.
Hi, so my name is Frances Haugen. I have she, her pronouns. I live in Puerto Rico. I moved there during COVID because I'm a survivor of a pretty dramatic series of medical traumas in my late 20s. And I still have a great deal of nerve pain in my legs, and being warm it makes me more comfortable. I am the co-founder of a brand new nonprofit called Beyond the Screen that is focused on the idea of how can we bring 1 million people to the table in an informed way. We cannot have democratic accountability for opaque systems like social media platforms unless we have many, many more people at the table and many more different kinds of people at the table.
You touched on this a little bit, and I think this is a good place to start the conversation. Do you want to walk through a little bit your journey from kind of working at some of these major tech companies to becoming an advocate for accountable technology and digital safety, and exactly what your journey has been?
Sure. So part of why I am so adamant about this question of like, how do we create more informed people, is that I have been in tech for a long time. So I joined Google back in 2006. We're not quite to the point where I can say to college students, like, back before you were born, but we're getting close. And I got to go on a very interesting journey in terms of being exposed to basically every level of what we call the stack. So most people who work on algorithmic systems work at just like very specific tiny slices of the complex systems that bring you things like the TikTok feed. And because I worked on Google Books way back in the day, I got to work at every single point in the stack because it was kind of an underloved system at Google. And then I went on from there to do things like be the lead product manager for ranking, which is like how we, and suggestions. So how do we actually compose the home feed on Pinterest, along with other consumer machine learning things. Like I worked on, I was the head data mining PM at Yelp for a few years. In concert, that means I have a much broader, more eclectic background when it comes to understanding algorithms and the problems that algorithmic products introduce. And so in 2019, Facebook reached out to me about working at Facebook. And I had been apprehensive about working at Facebook since at least 2007, when I went to the first open house I'd ever been to there. Because it was kind of known that there was a little kind of taint of amorality from Facebook. It seemed like there was kind of a willfulness to I don't want to criticize them too much in this way, but I'd been apprehensive for a long time. And so I was a little flippant with the recruiter, and I told her, the only thing I would do at Facebook is work on misinformation. Because I had a friend who was really, really integral to my recovery. So originally I hired him as an assistant, and he became a very dear friend of mine, who I lost to like conspiratorial thinking back in 2016. And so I had seen how even like a smart, college-educated, empathetic, well-read person could begin to believe fantasies about the world. And that could really derail someone's life. And I never wanted anyone to feel the pain that I felt when I lost him, because like this person I viewed as like critical to my recovery. Like he used to take me walking. So I had to relearn to walk. That's part of when I say health trauma. Like when I went relearn to walk, like he was there beside me, like every step of the way. And so it was just really, really painful when our lives separated in that way. So I ended up at Facebook as the first civic misinformation product manager. And that's kind of in contrast to the main misinformation team. So the main misinformation team had about 40 people. They were largely based on third-party fact-checking and kind of a derivative project called Community Review, which was meant to be a little bigger scale than third-party fact-checking. Our mission was almost the opposite of that. So it was so third-party fact-checking only produces hundreds of fact checks per month, which sounds crazy. It's like very small numbers in the content that goes on Facebook ever gets fact checked. And our mission was to address misinformation in places that didn't have third-party fact checking, or in times of crisis when third-party fact checking couldn't keep up. It takes a couple of days to do a fact check with the speed of a crisis. And in the process of working on that problem, it was incredibly alarming to me. Like I had not realized before working at Facebook that Facebook was the internet for 1 billion or maybe 1.5 billion people in the world. That Facebook went into some of the most vulnerable countries in the world and said, hey, if you use our products, your data is free. If you use anything else on the open web, you're going to pay for it. And so for at least maybe 3 billion people in the world, they live in countries where Facebook now is the internet. That because 30 or 40% of people who use the internet can only afford to use Facebook's products, the internet has converged in those countries so that you wouldn't have your own website, you would just have a Facebook page. You would transact business on Facebook. You instead of having a newspaper, you would run a Facebook group or a page. And part of why this is a calamity is those same people get the fewest safety systems. So the most fragile places in the world are almost always very linguistically diverse. They often speak peripheral languages. And by that, I mean a language that is spoken by maybe 20 million or fewer people in the world. And when you have those situations, Facebook's current strategies for safety just don't work. So Facebook has told us the only way we can be safe is through content moderation, censorship. And what they didn't say was that when we do those systems, when we write those AIs to find the good and bad content, we have to rewrite those systems language by language by language. And there's ways that you could hypothetically do this in a way that would scale. You could recruit community involvement and say, hey, we're going to basically have jury duty for platforms, that we have to self-govern. We can't be just subjects of our king and, either live by the rules or not live by the rules and leave. We have to be participants in our communities. Like, we could have systems like that, but we don't today. And instead, we just leave many of those people kind of hanging loose in the wind. So people who live in the most vulnerable places in the world, often their only internet is Facebook, and Facebook doesn't make any security systems for them. So, for example, during the Ethiopia civil war a couple of years ago, there was large amounts of violence that was fanned by social media. Like when the Tigray were being targeted, there was floods of misinformation in very tactical ways being spread, much like what happened in Myanmar, that incited a lot of violence against them. While that was going on, so Ethiopia has 120 million people. There are about 6 major language families. 2 of those 6 major language families had any safety systems built for them. So it kind of shows you, like, there are real consequences for how we design these systems today. And the last thing I want to close on is, my criticisms are not just about Facebook. They're about opaque systems. So that's a system where the public cannot do basic processes of democratic accountability. And Facebook's algorithms meet this definition. They run on data centers where we can't observe them, we can't inspect them, we can't ask questions. I thought we had 5 years before we would see violence caused by TikTok. Video is very expensive in terms of bandwidth. I thought when Starlink really started penetrating into African countries, Southeast Asia, we should expect to see a replay of the violence that we've seen caused by Facebook. We should expect to see that many times more, because a video is much more persuasive than text or a still image. And what's really kind of horrifying is last summer, we saw the first violence caused by TikTok. And in Kenya during the elections, there was waves of misinformation and violence inciting content. And we saw the first TikTok generated violence. And so I got a chance to speak with the person who was the head of election integrity at TikTok while that was going on. She's no longer with the company. And while those people were dying, there were no content moderators at TikTok that spoke Swahili. And so these are problems that will reproduce over and over again. And we need to ask questions about, what do people who live outside the United States, and that could even be Europe, what are their rights and what do we owe them? Because right now we have these platforms that are largely stationed in the United States that are exacting huge, huge burdens on countries or other countries around the world while being financially extractive. And so one of the things that I'm always trying to encourage people to think about is this digital colonialism? What is our role in decolonizing these systems? So thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here today. And you guys can ask me anything. There are no questions that if you ask me, I promise you, I will either tell you, sorry, I'm just not gonna answer that, or I won't be offended. So ask me anything.
So yeah, anyone feel free to ask Francis anything. And then Aiden and I were also curious to know, we just heard a lot about sort of the experience of working at these big tech companies like Facebook and sort of like looking at the internal aspect of it. So for all of you looking at it from the external aspect as users, we're just curious to hear your perspectives.
So the question was, what's it like to work inside, or like, I missed the second part of the question.
We're curious about for users, like for everyone, like what's your perspective on the value and kind of drawbacks of digital tech? So feel free to.
Interesting. So I think it's really hard to do a blanket statement about digital technology. So I believe you can build social media that is pro-social. One of the jokes about commenting systems is, people will, criticize something happening on Facebook's or Facebook will push back and say, like, comment, doing integrity on comments is hard. And people will push back and be like, hey, we had bulletin board communities for 20 years there were communities that persisted for 20 years. They had thousands and thousands, if not tens of thousands of people on them that didn't have these problems. So like, don't blame like commenting systems because you built a bad one. So there are ways of building technology that is focused on people's humanity, that values the autonomy of the users that use these products and their dignity. And so I don't think you can make blanket statements on it, because the real question here is, how do we set up the incentives such that it is easier and more in Facebook's interest to do that than to persist in the way they're acting today?
Avalon, go ahead.
Thank you so much for speaking with us today. I wanted to ask you a little bit about your opinion on the recent Supreme Court hearing on Section 230. I know that you were very involved in providing input on Section 230 and its relationship to general First Amendment rights in the United States. But as I've sort of been reflecting on some of the news on Supreme Court reactions to some of the oral arguments that were delivered on both the strengths and weaknesses of proposals related to weakening kind of Section 230's hold on immunity for these big tech organizations, I'd love to hear in reflection a few years later, since you gave your remarks, on kind of what you think the future of Section 230 really is, and whether or not you think that proposals to weaken Section 230 are feasible, or if rather we're looking at the wrong thing as kind of time continues to move on, and there's another kind of proposal that we should be considering in the midst of all of these arguments in the midst of all these legal arguments.
So I was incredibly heartened that the Supreme Court kept repeating over and over again, like, we're probably not the right people to talk about this. Like, I was kind of horrified when I saw that they had taken up that case, because just a level of people, the Supreme Court can't actually do much. They can come in and say, this party is responsible, they're not responsible. Like that's the level of like what they're able to do. They aren't able to craft remedies independently. So I'll give you a slight example of like a contrast. So like, let's imagine you were an attorney general. So what's interesting, like an attorney general acting in concert with other attorney generals, say of the different states, versus the Supreme Court acting. So they're both part of the justice system. But in the case of the attorney generals, we've seen from things like when they did the tobacco class action lawsuit back in the 90s. So the tobacco companies had been lying for years about their cigarettes not causing cancer. They knew internally that it was. They actively did things like Joe Camel to bring in kids, because they knew hooking kids early was really important. And the attorney generals all got together and brought a singular class action lawsuit that changed the rules around how that industry was governed. That is a systematic intervention. It comes in and says like, hey, like, it's not just that we're going to have like a before and an after, we're going to like have a transition. We need to have a process where the way we do governance needs to change. The Supreme Court can't do that. They just can't do that. And the thing that I'm super scared of is like, I agree with the idea that if you just strike down 230 without doing anything else, it's going to be very, very chaotic, extremely chaotic. And so I think places like the European Union have taken the right tact. So the European Union passed a huge generational law last year. It is, I think, the gold standard for regulation in the world. So when we talk about the problem of social media, like some people will say, oh, it's like teen depression. Some people will say it's hate speech. Some people will say it's like unaccountable censorship. Like there's a lot of different things where people would say this is the problem with social media. I think the problem with social media is that it is opaque, that we cannot do any of our normal rituals of governance. And those rituals of governance aren't just about the government. They're about what I call the ecosystem of accountability. So in the case of something like the automotive industry, we have litigators who understand what a cut corner looks like, and they hold companies accountable when they cut that corner. We have investors that want to have stable long-term returns, and so they have conversations with companies about managing risk, or they require data out of companies so they can assess the performance of those companies. We have legislative aides that understand what good and bad regulation looks like and what's possible to ask for. We have concerned citizens like Mothers Against Drunk Driving who keep the issues on the forefront of the news, even between scandals. And they feel empowered to do so because they understand what they can demand. When it comes to social media, we don't have any of those things, and we don't have them very, very, very intentionally. Facebook knew that if they did not give out data on their systems, like even basic data, no one else could get it, right? And people could come to them and say, I've seen this problem, and Facebook could, deny and deflect and minimize those concerns. And so the DSA, the Digital Services Act, goes specifically at that problem. So it says, hey, there's no way for us to catch up with what you know about your systems unless you actually level with us about what you know. So you're going to have to give us risk assessments. You're going to have to go in there and say, what do you believe are the risks of your products? And you're going to have to publish them so everyone can see them. And you're going to have to give academics and NGOs, like civil society groups, access to your data. And so they're going to set up what I like to call the Hubble of social media. So they're going to have a center where there's a couple people who are specialists at how to access the data. People can write grants and say, I want to ask this question. Can you give me the data that will allow me to ask that question? Because right now we don't get to form our own independent opinions. And I always like to remind people, our level of public knowledge on these systems is so minimal that we could jump to solutions, like coming in on 230 and saying, like, there's bad content on these systems, or 230. Part of what the Gonzalez case did, which I think is really interesting. I think they're not going to win, but I think it's an interesting argument. Is they said, people who would not have searched out ISIS content was sent ISIS content, so you're responsible for that. It's really hard to go in there and prohibit specific things, or even know, are we demanding the right things, if we don't have a public base of knowledge and a public base of opinions that we can have enough people up to speed that we can actually have a democratic debate on these things. So I think the DSA is an amazing example of like where to go.
What are some of the ways that social media has impacted you and your kind of digital privacy? And so anyone can just kind of.
Okay, hello. So I would like to say positively and negatively at the same time, because when I first got social media and I didn't know how to like navigate it, I would like to say I got a little depressed, because there's just so much news coming at you, and oh, this person died, this person, this, and then there's just so much violence, and then there's all these like social media influencers to where it's like, oh, you need to look like this and such. So it was like a lot to navigate, but once I kind of understood how to navigate it became easier, and I found lots of like TikTokers who are very positive and spread positivity, which brings like just a little bit of joy to the world, which I found very great. And that also brought me to a question that I wanted to ask really quick to I just wanted to know what everyone kind of thought of. Do you think users should also be held to a higher standard, just like the social media platforms? Like, do you think people should be, if they post something that they probably shouldn't, should they be banned for life or something like that? I just want to hear everyone's opinion.
So I thought that you didn't take it the direction I thought you were going to take it, which was like, should people be responsible for like the content that they consume? And the thing I was going to the thing I was going to say, give you an example of, is one of the things that I'm super concerned about is something called algorithmic escalation. So Facebook has run multiple studies where you take blank accounts and you follow some moderate topics. It could be center left, center right politically. It could be innocuous topics like healthy eating on Instagram. And just by clicking on the content provided and following groups or hashtags suggested, within a very short amount of time, maybe 2 or 3 weeks, you get taken to incredible extreme content. You can go from center right to white genocide, or center left to should we kill Republicans, right? Like crazy stuff. Or in the case of healthy eating, you can get pushed to self-harm and eating disorder content. And so I do want to be a little careful when we assign responsibility to individuals about how like you may be clicking on things, but if the algorithms are continuously pushing you towards more extreme topics, because you're more likely to engage with them, we have to be a little careful about what are we even consenting to. But with regard to the question of like, should people be responsible for what they post? There are many, many things that are hard about how we architect these platforms today in terms of accountability to individuals, right? That if you post something that is horrific, let's say you have a First Amendment right to say horrible things, right? You can stand on a street corner and you can scream about, anti-Semitic things and conspiracy theories about certain groups running the world. You have a First Amendment right to say those things. So I think it'll be very difficult to pass laws, at least, that would cause that. And I think people would push back if you had those kinds of policies in general. But I think the secondary thing is I do think there's a difference between freedom of speech and freedom of reach. So choices on who you give more distribution to are, my table leg just collapsed. I've been knowing that was going to come for a while. Okay, we're going to see. Just going to hold up for the rest of today. Sorry, guys. I did not think that was going to happen. My desk for, I don't know, a year has been basically like a TV tray that my husband bought for some other purpose. It's a long story, and it has not been designed to be used as intensively as I have used it. And unfortunately, you guys are paying the cost for it now. But I think there's questions around, if let's say you ban someone. So I fully support kicking people's accounts off, right? Like if you are inciting violence, it is the right and duty of an operator to, take your account down, in my opinion. For most other things, I'm not as extreme on that, but I do believe that you want to make sure you understand the biases in your algorithms, because right now people who say extreme things get much, much more distribution than people who say thoughtful things or things that are designed to reach across the aisle. So first direction of Facebook, we need to be extremely worried about Facebook, because when Mark talks about things like the rise, the year of efficiency, or flattening the org chart, right? I think he's basically stripping the company for parts. Like, they had already been migrating huge numbers, like, let's take one step over. Back before they built out the metaverse, they said, we are going to spend $10 billion a year on the metaverse, and we're going to hold headcount flat across the company. That is implicitly saying we're going to strip other parts of the company of employees and redeploy them onto the metaverse. And I saw that happening extensively when I worked at Facebook. Like, I saw people go from safety teams to working on the metaverse. Some of the best people on safety teams went to the metaverse because they knew that was the path where they'd actually be rewarded. That's a huge problem, because Facebook wasn't doing enough before, and they're definitely not doing enough now. Second issue, I think Facebook really want, like, they can see the writings on the wall, right? Like, they've had 35% profit margins for a number of years. They know that if they had to do an adequate job with safety, they probably have 20% profit margins, 15% profit margins, still better profit margins than almost any company in the world for their scale. For context, most telecommunications companies have 3 or 4% profit margins. They're utilities. They would be doing great in that regard. And I think Facebook can see that's coming. And so I think part of Mark's pivot to the metaverse is that he doesn't want to be responsible for what happens on his platform. That if he's a hardware provider, or he provides like an app marketplace, he can say, oh, I'm so sorry that you got harassed, you got harmed, you got whatever happened to you on that application, but we didn't write it. It's their fault, it's not ours. And I don't think he's going to take responsibility for the idea that there's common infrastructure that they could be making to make the metaverse in general safe. For example, if Facebook is struggling with linguistic equity, the idea that it doesn't matter what language you speak, you should be safe. We shouldn't be saying you can be safe in English, but you can't be safe in other languages. They could be making tools that make it easy to do translation or easy to do support for people in many languages. Or given that a very small number of users cause the vast majority of all the harms, they should have repeat offender systems where if you violate and you get kicked off of one app and you start having a pattern of behavior, you get blocked from the system, right? They should be building that kind of systems because they should be taking that responsibility. I don't think they want to. Next, and I think we shouldn't, poo-poo the metaverse, right? Like a lot of the complaints people have for the metaverse today are things that I think will be solved in the next 5 years, and if not 5 years, 10 years. So things like the headsets are too heavy, the batteries don't last long enough, the screens aren't high enough resolution, things are laggy. All those things are going to go away. Those are engineering problems. And the crazy thing about, Moore's law like patterns is things just get way better faster than we imagine. So I think we shouldn't say, oh, this is never going to work. Computers back in 1980 were horrible, right? My father bought a computer in 1984. There was an IBM, and it was still in our home 6 years later. And I remember just thinking, why would what a horrible computer. Things change. ChatGPT 3. ChatGPT 3 is going to change how we do safety in really, really profound ways, because one of the ways that we caught the worst offenders, so that's things like information operations, was that we looked for repetition. You lose the ability to scale your information operation if you have to write new content for each of your fake users. But with ChatGPT 3, and so people recycle content. They'll have lots of people post the same kinds of things, and we can catch people when they do that. When you get to things like ChatGPT 3, you can have little mild permutations between all of them because the generative AI is producing it. And very rapidly, you have information operations that are impossible to detect using that method. I think there's hope, though. So there's a man named Noam Bardeen who is founding a new social network called Post News. He founded Waze, which is like the other mapping app from Google. And the way he was able to create all the maps in Waze, so they mapped the world, was they had a system of reputation and credibility. So, as you put in edits and they got approved, like you built up credibility, you had nested sets of moderators effectively. It was a platform where people were citizens, they weren't subjects. I'm lagging, make sure, go. He found a way to say, let's do participatory democracy to make this thing. This is a collective effort. And he's trying to apply that model to social media. And I think it's going to be very interesting. Systems like that are going to become essential in a world of ChatGPT 3 because you'll have to move beyond the paradigm of just focusing on content.
I'm really interested in hearing from other people too about like the direct ways that social media has impacted them, because I know that there are all of these legislative and data and engineering challenges that we need to address. But I'm really also just curious about how these have affected some of you guys, and I would love to hear from you all.
Personally, I'm LGBTQ, and it's affected me both positively and negatively. On one hand, it's on another hand, like, you get called names a lot, and like I know kids in my school post things on Instagram that are kind of hurtful sometimes. At one point it got really bad last year, and the school had the great idea to get the police involved because Instagram kind of just didn't remove the posts. So it kind of spiraled out of control.
So one of the things that we've been talking about is this idea of, what if there was a greater recognition of the idea that kids exist, like especially K-12, kids exist within communities, right? Because right now you have things like the principal of my high school told me that there was a fight club on Instagram. So it was an anonymous account, and people were going and picking fights and videotaping them. And posting them on Instagram. And the victims of those fights were embarrassed to come forward and admit they had happened. And so he was left trying to figure out like which kids are featured in this thing. And when he wrote to Facebook, he couldn't get them to take it down. Instagram said like, you're not a party to this, even though he was the one dealing with the aftermath of it. And so what if we did acknowledge the idea that kids exist in communities, and the path to safety may be getting more people involved?
I think the biggest blessing and curse of social media in my life personally is the ability for it to connect you to people and their ideas. So when I'm probably just a little bit older than the people in this group, I'm 23. When I was 12, right, like I got a Facebook account and I had to ask my mom for permission, but now I see there's even like 6-year-olds with their own Instagram. And I used to go on a website called Omegle a lot to talk to people. And in retrospect, as an adult, I started to realize, horrified, how many pedophiles I had talked to and how close I was to possibly being groomed or exploited by these people. And when I was in middle school, there was a huge case, the case of Amanda Todd, if anybody knows, and that was like a viral story. This girl who'd been exploited by pedophiles online in these type of Omegle-esque websites. And that kind of started the conversation around like revenge porn. I know also during that time isanyoneup.com was like something that was happening. So I would say that like the ability to connect with people who can really add value to your life and who can really try to abuse you. And I also just wanted to ask a question to Francis. You know, social media has evolved so much over time, like algorithmically, people's trust to social media, like people used to not even want to put their real names or their birthday on there. And now we give all of our information. How do you think that social media has changed the most internally in companies like Facebook and Instagram, or I guess the same company actually, in that way?
So to give you guys a little context on what the internet was like in the 90s and like how, you know, people thought about children using computers. We got 4 like color Macintosh computers in the school library of the elementary school I went to when I was 10, maybe 9, I think 10. And these were like fast. They in many ways they had user interfaces that are like the ones of today. And you know, all the other computers were like black and white kind of things. And most of them were not Macs. They were like the old Apple ones, like back when you had typed commands and things like that. And I got banned from the internet for numerous weeks because I disclosed in a chat room that I lived in Iowa. I didn't give my name, I didn't give my address, I didn't give my city, but I said that I lived in Iowa, and that was a violation of school policy. So that's how the world has changed. Like it used to be, there was that level of paranoia about threats on the internet. But I am so sorry. I'm in the middle of editing my book, and I've been doing like 14-hour days for like the last 5 days, and I have forgotten your question, and I'm so sorry because I'm exhausted. Can you repeat it one more time?
Yes, it was, how do you, in your opinion, how have social media companies changed the most internally over the years?
Sure. So I think, so again, let's roll back in time. So we talk about Web 2, we talk about Web 3 a lot, right? So Web 1 was, we had static web pages, like a blog. Web 2 was, we started having interactive pages. We started having things like Ajax, which is like, you know, you could actually have sliders and things can move, and it was like more like an interface on it, like a normal application, but now as a web application. And then we have Web 3, which is like decentralized technologies. Some people say the metaverse. I think Web 3 is decentralized technologies. Back, the first scraper I ever wrote, so the first thing to download as a social network I had was Friendster. And I think the first generation of social media was what I call directory social media. So let's not talk about bulletin boards. So bulletin boards, I think, are also social media. That's conversant. It's kind of like a Discord server, but much slower and no emojis. We had a phase that was like a directory. So the original Facebook was like, everyone gets a page, they get to present themselves however they want to. It's a directory. You can go look up your friends' pages. You can see their photos. Maybe you can leave comments on those photos. MySpace was like that. Friendster was like that. That was social media up until about 2008. So Facebook bought a company called FriendFeed. And FriendFeed was the first kind of moment of the idea that you could have an evolving picture of a person that would like come together, and what you might want to actually merge the lives of all your friends into a single feed. So back then, RSS feeds were very popular for different services. So you might use a service that tracked all the music you listen to. So you can kind of get a summary, or other people could see what music you're listening to. Or you might have another one where you had recorded when you went running. You know, you had different services. And for the first time, you could aggregate all those RSS feeds into a single profile. And if you followed a bunch of your friends, it would aggregate all of their activities into a single feed. And that was revolutionary. So this is like 2007, 2008. And it was just remarkably engaging. It was really fun to like scroll down and be like, oh, my friend read this book. Oh, my friend listened to this music. They watched this movie, whatever. They bought this thing. So Facebook bought them. And so our newsfeed, as we see it today, came from that. And when the newsfeed rolled out, people were outraged. Like they were absolutely outraged, because it used to be like you could put information on your profile, and unless someone was actively going and looking it up, they weren't going to see it. And now you change your relationship status and it gets blasted out to all your friends. So it used to be a thing where you could change your status on your page, and like people would begin to notice it slowly over time, or maybe someone was curious if you were single and they'd go look it up. Now you change your relationship status and everyone's like, oh my God, you guys broke up. Right? It was like a very different mode of relating to each other. And people felt really violated. Like they felt like their privacy had been violated by them. Then we move into the next phase. So now we have algorithmic feeds. So those first feeds were kind of like email inboxes. You know, something happens, they show up in your feed. Your attention was still being directed by other people. It was just being consolidated. Then we move into having algorithmic feeds. So if, say, 2007 was the first friend feed, 2008 was the first algorithmic friend feed. Now you don't know what you're seeing. Like people again freaked out. They said, I don't know if I'm missing things. Like, I don't know if Facebook is hiding things that are important to me from me. Like there was a feeling of a violation of trust. You might notice a theme here, which is that people feel powerless over and over again. It takes a long time for these algorithmic feeds to come out, right? So Twitter, it had a feed because that's like what Twitter was, but they didn't have an algorithmic feed till 2016. It takes a long time for these innovations to spread. And what comes along with that, so on Facebook, we go from having primarily a focus on people you know, not intermediated by an algorithm, then we move to having an algorithm, then we move to having things like pages and groups. And those pages and groups, initially you had to pick them. You know, you might have gotten suggested one by a friend or invited to one, but you had to actively consent. And then you move into a phase where instead of having actively consent, they say things like, oh, you got invited by a friend. We're going to put content from that feed in your stream for 30 days. And if you like any of it or you comment on any of it, we'll consider that you joined the group. So if you said that's misinformation or that's hate speech, suddenly you're part of that group. That kind of arc around kind of moving further and further away from people you know is a pattern we see repeated across different platforms. So Pinterest started out being intentional. You have to choose who you receive content from. It's chronological. Then you start having a ranked feed. Then you start having things like topics, where instead of choosing who you followed, you choose a topic, but you're still choosing. Like you're not having anything put in your feed that you didn't ask for. Then you move to pure recommendations. You start having the platform making choices about the things that you're going to get to receive. The platform knows better than you do about what you should get. And the reason why this really matters is that Facebook has done studies where they say, let's divide all the content on our platform into two pools. So content you consent to and content you don't consent to. So content you do consent to is like people you actually friended, pages you actually joined, groups you actually joined. Content you didn't consent to is your friend commented on a post he saw and now it shows up in your feed. Or you got invited to a group, content from that group ended up in your feed for 30 days. You clicked, you put a comment saying this is misinformation on something and you became a member of that group. If all you do is say, we're going to respect your consent, like your autonomy, your dignity, we're going to give priority to content you consented to over content you did not consent to. And for free, you get less violence, less hate speech, and less nudity. Your friends and family are not the problem. Having computers intermediate, direct our attention is the problem.
So we're coming up into our final stretch. We have a little bit less than 10 minutes and you have a few hands raised. So we're just going to do super rapid fire. We'll go William, Kyle, then Connor, and let's try to do like 30-second answers so everyone has a chance to ask their question.
Yeah, I had a question because I know you were talking about how hard it is to fact check and get that. And I know some apps, like I know Twitter had one, I'm not sure if it's still going, where it would tell you if it's fact checked. And I think that's going to be going away after Musk bought it. And I also kind of leads me into like a secondary question, which is, what do you think about social media, like enterprises basically becoming like the toys of billionaires who can just use it and change it however they want?
Well, to be real clear, we have had our primary form of social media, Facebook and Instagram, be controlled by a billionaire since 2004. Or I guess he wasn't a billionaire yet. He was a billionaire as of 2008 or something. So we've had this for a long time. Musk is not the first one. And I think the real question here is, do we want to have critical communal infrastructure be completely unaccountable to the public? That's the real question. The first part of your question, content moderation. So the thing he's referring to is something called Birdwatch. And it was meant to be more of like a collaborative, community-directed form of commentary, saying like, hey, like this is a misleading statement, here's why. And I think programs like that are really interesting, and we need to invest more in figuring out how to make them work, because they are cost-effective and they scale to small languages.
Kyle?
First of all, just thank you for being here. But I'm curious about like what you have to say about the fact that like inciting violence and like what facts are not agreed upon between people. And we've seen this in like algorithms that choose to censor certain people and not others. And, you know, this can be caused for many reasons. You know, TikTok promotes some things and not others because it's the, you know, the CCP running it, and there's steal our data, that type of stuff. But I mean, I guess generally, what do you have to say about the fact that like there's not a consensus upon what inciting violence actually is? And if we don't be careful, you know, this stuff extends beyond social media. An example is a children's book author, Matt Walsh, his book was taken off of Amazon because of things that happened on other platforms. So I'm just curious, like, what you have to say about that.
So I think that content moderation as the primary strategy doesn't work. And I've been very consistent saying this ever since my 60 Minutes interview and my Senate testimony. So when we focus on content moderation as our first line of defense and safety, we give up on the most vulnerable people in the world, because those content moderation systems do not extend linguistically as they are built today. You know, we don't write those systems for most places. So we have these algorithms that are pushing people towards more and more extreme content. They give more reach and more distribution to more extreme content. How else can we correct them? I think part of that is by demanding transparency so we can watch when those trends happen. And there are other ways of dealing with these problems that aren't about language. So for example, if we take things like how reshares happen on Facebook. So let's imagine Alice writes something, her friend Bob reshares it, her friend Carol now gets it, so friend of friend. And now Carol reshares it and it ends up in Dan's newsfeed. Dan and Alice are more than 2 steps away from each other. Dan doesn't know Alice. She could be a crank. She could be an expert. Imagine a world where instead of having a little reshare button where he can just reflexively hit reshare, we say, hey, we respect your freedom of speech. You can share this if you want, but you need to copy and paste it. You have to make a choice. Because you are now far enough away from this original speaker, you need to be intentional about sharing. You still can say whatever you want. It can be misinformation, it can be hate speech, whatever, but you have to choose to do it. Adding that little moment of reflection decreases misinformation the same amount as the third-party fact-checking program. And it scales to every language in the world. That's what I mean when I say, hey, we need to be doing safety by design, not safety after the fact. The last thing is, we have criteria for things that are violence inciting. So I think those criteria should be public. But there are things like if you compare people to insects or pests, that kind of language, especially when it comes from political leaders, There's been a lot of concerns out of India where Modi compares the Muslims in India to, insects and rodents. That is a classic pattern that precedes genocides. And so when I say like violence incitement, I'm talking about things like Capitol riots, things like saying let's kill Muslims, right? If we don't do those things, we have seen 2 genocides already, so Myanmar and Ethiopia, and we will continue to see more.
Let's go to Connor.
Hi, thank you for your insightful answers and talk. You can answer this in one word, one sentence maybe, just because of time reasons, but presumably since you aren't the only big tech employee that has seen all these issues, but you obviously have like come out and, testified before the Senate, done the 60 Minutes interview. For those other tech employees that see this too and don't necessarily feel comfortable doing what you have done, should they have some sort of accountability in what they're perhaps complicit in, for lack of a better word, because I don't think anyone is evil per se, that's just an employee. And how does that look, if possible?
So I write a lot about this in my book. The idea that there is a whole culture inside of Silicon Valley that is a system of incentives that decreases what individual employees view as possible. I am very, very privileged, right? Like I was one of the top ranked debaters in the United States. So I knew that if I were to come forward, that I could defend myself and I could explain clearly what had happened. Most people who had my job in Silicon Valley do not have that privilege, right? I won't say that they struggle to communicate with each other, but they struggle to be persuasive or to articulate arguments that are kind of at this level of complexity. The second is I was a history minor, right? Very few people who had my job in Silicon Valley are history minors. And I was a Cold War studies minor. And my thesis was on civil disobedience against civil defense. And so I had templates, models in my mind about resistance. Part of the study of the Cold War is the study of how was the Soviet Union overthrown. And I strongly believe in the performative nature of power. And what that means is that when we speak, that is a performative action, right? You're performing, but it actually changes the world. That being visible in having opinions of saying like, I need to live in the truth actually changes others' behavior. And there are other major whistleblowers. So my law firm currently works with a lot of whistleblowers and SEC. And my lawyer said, easily 75% of everyone who comes forward and talks to us says, I did it because of Frances Haugen, right? So our individual actions can change the world, even if in the initial moment, there's less of a result than we want. And I think the last thing I would leave you with, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I want to make sure everyone's included, so we're just going to go very quickly.
I just had a question about what the standard template looks like today for a digital integrity team in a social media company, and how do these current team requirements pale in contrast to what you consider necessary?
So the great horror is between Mark Zuckerberg cleaning house and Twitter cleaning house. There is now no template for doing even a moderately good job in the industry, right? I think TikTok cannot be held as an example of doing a good job because they definitely do not care about, say, non-US, non-European users. Like there's no way you would have no moderators who spoke Swahili otherwise. And China has a long history of having even worse racial issues than the United States. I think the question is, even Facebook wasn't doing an adequate job, right, when they were there. And that's because without transparency, the business incentives will always encourage the cutting of corners. And so that's just the nature. Until we get things like the Digital Services Act, and that's in the process of rolling out, until we have things like that, we can't expect them to do an adequate job with staffing.
Thank you all so much for this conversation and for being so open and honest. This has been so wonderful to hear from all of you. And Frances, thank you so much for taking the time to engage with all of us. We want to be part of the solution, so this has just been such an amazing experience. We'll see you all again soon, and thank you, everyone.
Happy day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a great day.